how about that? That work okay?
Yeah,
Looks good here.
Yeah, it looks good to me. Yeah.
Okay. Is lighting okay, or do I need to pop on a little bit of light there?
No, your lighting's good. It's good.
Good. How are you guys today?
I'm
I'm
doing pretty
good.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we're both doing good. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. How about you?
I'm doing well. So it's Justin, and I see Antonio on your screen. Is that what you go by?
Tony. I usually go by Tony, but I write like articles too. So whenever those are published, I think Antonio sounds fancier. So I keep Antonio. It's like more official, I guess you could say.
I like it. Antonio, very, very dignified.
Yes.
Justin and Antonio, we're good to go. You tell me.
Hey, I like my name, so.
and you should. It's a good one to like.
Hey,
Justin, you're good with yours, aren't you?
I think so. Mine's not bad.
Yeah, I think pretty darn good. I'd roll with it.
Appreciate that though. We can get started though, but I wanted to say thank you for hopping on. I know you're very busy. I know you're doing Titans preseason and then NFL Network stuff too.
Just let me stop you right there.
All right.
I appreciate what you're saying, but here's the bottom line. Are you not busy?
Yeah, I would say I'm kind of busy.
Antonio, you busy?
Oh, you know it.
Okay, everyone we run into is busy. Okay, so it's nice to thank them. That's a good thing to do as hosts and all that. But don't ever think that, oh, you're so busy. Unless you're of a certain level, like if it's George Clooney, that's a whole nother story.
Right.
It's me. We're good.
Fair enough, though. Well, I appreciate you hopping on now. Well, we can get started, though. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Rossetti and Stewart Podcast. He's Antonio Rossetti. I'm Justin Stewart. We're coming from you from Zoom. Just a reminder to all of our listeners, you can find our show at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcast from, just search the Rossetti and Stewart Podcast. As you see, we have a very special guest today. You know him from the NFL and CBS. He does preseason football, calls preseason football games for the Tennessee Titans, does a lot of work for NFL Network, and is also NFL.com as well. He's also on the voice of Madden too. Charles Davis. Thank you again for hopping on this podcast, man.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate the nice introduction. I'm a team on Madden with Brandon Gaudin, who is now the play-by-play person for the Atlanta Braves baseball, right, as well as obviously all the other stuff he does with Westwood One, Fox Sports, Big Ten Network. The man never sleeps.
Right. Tony, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good, actually. I had a busy weekend this weekend, but got some articles done for the paper I write for. But yeah, it's been good. And speaking of the Atlanta Braves, which you just mentioned, talk about a good baseball team. Pretty much everyone in the lineup has over 20 home runs. So, yeah. But I'm doing pretty good, though.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And in this day and age, everyone hitting over 20, and we're not automatically getting them tested. I came up in that time frame when I saw Mark McGwire go from a wiry, good home run hitting guy to a monster who was breaking records. Jose Canseco was always a big guy, but he was more fleet of foot. Man, he was a 30-30 guy who could steal bases, and all of a sudden you looked up, and he looked like he was just going to take out half the clubhouse when he walked through it. Next thing you know, he's hitting bombs too. So that was a different time frame. These guys nowadays, they're getting it done, but I don't feel like when we're watching a baseball game now, as soon as they hit a home run, you should run them right in for drug testing. It just seems like those guys have gotten themselves built up. It's a little more of the natural. And, of course, they've changed the way with the launch angles and how they're swinging the bat, from the time when I was a kid, where if you didn't swing it level from your little league coach all the way up to the bigs, people had a stroke, right? You got to swing it level, contact. Now they're like, let's launch that bad boy. We'll take a few strikeouts and pay it off with a couple of home runs.
Yeah, and if you look at the league average, too, it's like a 240 league average. The steroid era, everyone was batting 300. Think about it. Barry Bonds, you saw Vinny Castilla and Andres Galarraga just absolutely killing it. Those are just a couple of names. Sammy Sosa.
Remember when Brady Anderson hit 50?
Oh, my God.
The Orioles, yeah. He was.
Yeah.
He used to be the guy who would race fans in the parking lot. Remember that? After ball games, They'd meet up and they'd race in the parking lot, and the next thing you know, he's hitting bombs.
It was a different time. It really was a different time. It's like now. It's like, my dad and I always talk about it. The small ball baseball. It's like kind of gone down the drain. It's like if there's a runner on first and second, instead of bunting that guy over, you want to try to drive in for your runs there now.
Yeah, that back in my time frame. You remember the manager Earl Weaver?
Yeah, for the Orioles. Yeah,
Orioles Hall of Fame manager. Earl Weaver was a little bit ahead of his time because you guys, you mentioned Tony. Let me rephrase Antonio, because I like that a lot better. He would get runners on first and second, and most people in baseball then you would talk about if you had less than 2 outs, you might bunt them over and have a chance for second and third. A single gets them in, the whole deal. Earl Weaver always said nothing better than a 3-run homer. He played for the big inning all the time and paid off in a big way. His Orioles won big, and they actually had a manual they used to call Playing Baseball the Orioles Way, and they were always in contention. I mean, he had them in the World Series in 71 against the Pirates, 79 against the Pirates. They won it against the Phillies. That was just a great way of playing baseball, and the Orioles were one of the preeminent teams. And how interesting is it here in 2023? The Orioles are back, and they're back.
They are. And the thing, too, is like you mentioned, those 70 teams, what did they have? They had good pitching, too. Headed by, Jim Palmer. And, this year you're finally getting to see, the Orioles, when they were good with Chris Davis and Scope and Mark Trumbo, they were missing that pitching. Now they have everything. So it's good to see it.
You remember that great staff they had in the 70s? Palmer, Mike Cuellar, Pat Dobson, and Dave McNally.
Mm-hmm.
Monsters. Absolute monsters. Every time you ran out, you got an Orioles, you're like, oh, we got a 4-game series. You're going to get all 4 of them? Oh, no. These were all 20-game winners.
Anyway, yeah, those teams were like, they probably could have won. They could have won more than what they won, for sure.
Yeah, they essentially got upset twice by my Pirates. I mean, essentially twice. 71 when Clemente was a beast in the World Series. I think he hit 414 or something in the series. And then in 79, that was the Pop Stargell We Are Family team.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, both of those Pirates teams came from like 3-1 back to win it. So I know they did in 79 for sure. I think in 71, it might have been something similar. But it's funny that great pitching by the Orioles got countered in 71 by Steve Blass of the Pirates.
Steve Blass,
Steve Blass couldn't find the strike zone anymore.
And Steve Blass.
I mean, he was just bringing it. And then in 79, obviously, that's Willie Stargell and crew and Big Dave Parker and the Candyman, John Candelaria on the mound. And, of course, Kent Tekulve, if you got in range, he was going to close it out with his big glasses and his patent leather shoes.
Wait,
I Bill Madlock and Phil Garner, scrap metal, like that Pirates team.
Phil Garner, scrap iron himself, later a manager in the bigs. Bill Robinson. I actually went to basketball camp with Bill Robinson's son for a year or two. I mean, they had teams. That's when Omar Moreno was starting to emerge.
Stealing all those bases.
And, of course, Dave Parker, the Cobra, that was my guy. I mean, who could forever forget him in the All-Star game where he won the MVP essentially because of throwing people out. He lost the first one in the lights at the Kingdome. It bounced. He picked it up, threw the guy out at third, and then who could forget the rocket? All the way from the fence at home. Bam, put it on him.
I do have to ask, though, are you a Pirates fan?
I grew up a monster Pirates fan. I became a Pirates fan. My first guy was Rennie Stennett, number 6, before he signed a free agent deal with the Giants back when those were just getting started. And you guys remember who was the pitcher? Oh, God, I can see him now. So plain as day. I'll get back to him anyway. He signed with the Atlanta Braves. Was it Andy Messersmith? Might have been Messersmith. He signs with the Braves in free agency, and they put number 17 on him. Why? Because that was when the Braves TBS was Super Channel number 17. And they thought that was great advertising for the deal. That's when Ted Turner tried to manage the team, and he did for like one game before Major League Baseball stepped in. Whoa. We can't have that. We can't do that.
Anyway. Ted Turner. He was another one. I think he owned WCW as well, but I want to talk about like Rennie Stennett too, the 7-for-7 game. Do you remember that?
Absolutely. I mean, that was the reason I fell into Rennie Stennett. I was a little guy. My little league baseball team was called the Pirates, and they gave me number 6. You know, when you're a youngster, you're not exactly fighting over numbers. You don't understand at that point. Hey, I want a certain number, and you don't have the kind of the brass to ask your little league coach, I want to wear a certain number. They just kind of go, this looks like this fits you. Take this one. This like fits you. Take this one. And I ended up with number 6. I was like, Pirates 6, Rennie Stennett. Cool. And that's how it all began.
I know. Like,
sorry.
Okay, Justin. Yeah, no,
I'm sorry. We're like in baseball talking. This is like the last thing I expected, though. But it's actually really cool.
Sorry about
really
that.
Cool.
I'm not trying to hijack the show. You guys.
No.
Oh, no, I love baseball.
No, this is cool. No, this is cool to see though. But I thought it would be like a perfect segue. We can talk baseball again though. But like as far as you growing up, you kind of talked about like just then. Was baseball always the sport, or like was football like neck and neck? Like what sport? Like how did football come into play?
Yeah, for me, Justin, I grew up. I was born in a place called born in town in Tennessee, East Tennessee, Elizabethton, Tennessee. And a lot of people, if you're in football, you know Elizabethton because Jason Witten, who will be in the Hall of Fame one day as a tight end, came out of there before matriculating to the University of Tennessee. He played high school football there for the Elizabethton Cyclones for his grandfather, Coach Ryder, who every town has that coach, the coach, right? He was the coach, and they played big time. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, one of Jason's brothers is the head coach at Elizabethton High, and he's winning state championships there. I mean, it's really kind of a cool story. But that's where I was born. My mother's side of the family there. My dad's from West Virginia. I grew up, my first 2 years in life were essentially there. Then we moved to a place called New Paltz, New York. Ulster County, New York, Mid-Hudson Valley. I grew up there. I'm the Yankee of the family. My dad was a high school teacher, coach. He coached football, basketball, you name it. He did it back then. Every coach coached multiple sports. So the gym, the practice field, wherever was essentially my babysitter. Okay, so when I got on my mom's nerves, she just dropped me off with my dad and said, you got him. And that's the way it would go. To your point, Justin, my growing up years, my formative years, baseball was number 1 in our country. Okay. Every lead story was about baseball. In the off season, it was called the Hot Stove League. That was your information. That would be our Twitter and internet now, right? Everyone was discussing baseball. The Sporting News was the preeminent Bible for baseball and had every box score of every minor league game played. So if you followed a team and a franchise, you knew who the prospects were coming up. You knew who hit what. He hit 275 for Bluefield in Double-A. You knew all of these things. That's how you followed it up. The NFL draft, I still remember because I used to read the newspaper. My dad got me reading it young. The NFL draft would occur and it'd be Giants select Rocky Thompson in first round, and that'd be about it. Then the next thing would be, what were the Mets and the Yankees going to do? And then it'd be 10 days till pitchers and catchers report. And then baseball, as time went on and football kept gaining in popularity to take us to where we are now, I saw the shift. Look, I grew up when boxing was huge and everyone in the world knew who the heavyweight champion was. I remember the Olympics. We all knew who won the 100-meter dash because that person was deemed the fastest person in the world. All these things were going on during my years growing up. I was born in 1964, just for context. Now, obviously, football has overtaken everything. They are the front headlines. They're the ones that dominate the offseason and discussions and media and everything else. And baseball gets, and right there is where it says pitchers and catchers report, as opposed to it used to be a headline. It's all changed. But growing up, my little hometown, 3,000 people or so, we did not have Pop Warner football. We didn't have organized football for little people. So baseball was number 1 for all of us. I mean, I used to take my glove and oil it in the winter, put the ball in the pocket, tie it up, throw it in the corner until that first beautiful day in March, and you go out in that raw, blustery day, but you thought you saw the sun peeking out, and you thought it was baseball season. I ended up playing a lot. Obviously, I ended up playing football in college, but it started obviously in middle school, high school. My high school football coach, John Ford, his assistant, Bill Freer, But my dad was the number one guy that got me going because he had coached it and kind of got me going on all of that. But those are the people I played for. You know, my JV coaches, Jerry Craig and Frank Siliberto. These people have all had a monster impact on me. And then I was fortunate enough to get a chance to play in college at Tennessee for the legendary Johnny Majors and a whole bunch of other people. George Catalbos, my favorite defensive backs coach when I got there. Doug Matthews, my special teams coach, who I'm still tight with today. Coach Matthews runs a radio show. He's in competition with you two, all right? He's got his own radio show in Nashville that I do every Saturday. And you know how that came about? Because he said, Davis, I'm starting a radio show, and you're going to be on it every week. He didn't ask me. He told me. Why? Because coaches do that. And guess what? It doesn't matter how long ago you played for them. You know what I said? Yes, coach. And that was the end of it. That's 15 years ago. I'm still doing that show. Of course, he also told me he wasn't going to pay me. And he was right. He didn't pay me for a bunch of years, but that it didn't matter. If coach said you were going on, you were going on. Right. But football, loved it. And Justin, I'll end it with this. The Green Bay Packers were not very good during my formative years. Like when I was born, 64, they were in their heyday, right? So by the time I got old enough, Antonio, to realize who the Packers were, they were on the downside, all right? Vince Lombardi had left, gone to Washington. Phil Bankston had taken over the end of the dynasty. That didn't go well. They brought in Dan Devine from Missouri. He won a division championship, got beat by Washington in the playoffs. And then the Packers went from like 72 until Holmgren without making the playoffs. All right, they went through Bart Starr, Forrest Gregg, Lindy Infante. They went through coaches. Now, back then, even if you weren't great, you coached a long time. I think Bart Starr coached 8 or 9 years and never made the playoffs. That would never happen today. You know that. But he was a Packers legend, so, of course, he coached a long time. But I fell in love with the Packers because I saw a running back named Donnie Anderson from Texas Tech play. And back then, a lot of the position players kicked and punted. And Donnie punted for the team, and he punted left-footed. I remember watching that, and my dad told me that I looked at him and said, Dad, he's doing it wrong. He said, what do you mean he's doing it wrong? He's kicking with the wrong foot. How's he doing that? And he said, no. Some people do things with the opposite hand. You're right-handed, but he's left-footed, and it's okay. And I was like, oh. And I was very confused. So this was somewhere circa 72, 73, somewhere in that neighborhood. And my dad said I went out in the yard that day and started trying to pump the ball left-footed. And he says the funniest thing he ever saw. I missed it a lot. I fell down a lot. I was awkward because I wasn't used to doing it. And he said he came home from work like 3 weeks later. And I said, hey, Dad. And I punted the ball to him, and it was left-footed. And he went, oh. And guess what? I stayed left-footed. I punted left-footed in high school, and I kicked as well. Think about this. I was a straight-on kicker. When was the last time you saw a straight-on kicker? You guys probably never in your lifetime, right? Mark Mosley with Washington won the NFL MVP. You can look it up, as they say. My high school coach, Coach Ford, John Ford, gotta love that man. Somehow he found a size 11 or 12, whatever my size was in high school, square-toed, left-footed shoe for me to kick in high school. I can't imagine what it took for him to find that shoe.
No, I do want to ask, too. You brought up Johnny Majors, too, a little bit earlier. And, you know, we're from Pittsburgh, and he coached Pitt as well. You know, the Johnny Majors championship. How was it playing for Coach Johnny Majors?
It was amazing because, you know, I grew up a Tennessee fan with my family back in East Tennessee. Condredge Holloway was the first black quarterback to start in the SEC, and that was at Tennessee. I fell in love with watching him play. I fell in love with the Big Orange as a kid, and it was kind of my lifetime dream to play there. But growing up in the East, you couldn't avoid what Coach Majors did with Pitt. He took over a program, 0-11 the first season, and gradually got better. You know, his captain was in his first team at Pitt? Dave Wanstead, later the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, Chicago Bears in the NFL. And then they recruited like crazy. Back then, recruiting, there was no cap on recruiting. So I think they recruited like 125 players or something like that. But in that class, you got a Tony Dorsett, you got a Cecil Johnson, you got a Hugh Green. I mean, they got monsters, all right? Matt Cavanaugh. I mean, they got players. Elliot Walker, boom, 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 boom. And they put it together. And by the time Tony Dorsett was a senior, they're the best team in college football and proved it convincingly against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl when they stuffed them and won Coach Majors his first and only national championship. And then he went back home to Tennessee. We put a lot of pressure on him back in Knoxville. It's time for Johnny to come home. And they would have big bumper stickers when Johnny comes marching home again and, all the whole deal. So it was great to get him back. But he always told me he loved Pittsburgh. And you remember, he came back and finished his career, a second run at Pittsburgh. Didn't go nearly as well as the first one, but still a legendary figure in Pittsburgh history, in Pitt football history, and in the city itself. And he always told me how much he loved Pittsburgh and actually revered Pitt, the people, the city of Pittsburgh. And he did a lot of going back there in his later years. He wasn't just hanging out in Knoxville. He'd go back to Pitt often.
Yeah, and Johnny Majors too. I mean, you mentioned how he recruited Dave Wannstedt. He ended up coaching Pitt as well with Shady McCoy, and so yeah. But no, my dad, he was born in '68, so he's a couple years younger. But he just remembers, the teams, Mark May, and even Mark May, and Freilich, and just like all these players, they were just monsters
absolute monsters. And you remember after Coach Majors left, he left that program in such great shape. Jackie Sherrill took over and went like 33-3 in his time there as a head coach. And then from him, I think it was Coach Fazio. And they always had good, hard-hitting, aggressive teams. I played against Pitt in college when I was at Tennessee against Bill Freilich.
1983.
1983. And they didn't get a first down against us until the third quarter, and they beat us 13-3. We were inside the 20, I think, 4 times that game and only got a field goal out of it. Threw a couple picks, and we got beat on opening night. But I remember seeing Bill Freilich and Reggie White from my Tennessee Vols going chest to chest all night. It was like 2 mastodons met in the middle of the forest and just collided play after play after play after play. And both of them obviously had big-time NFL careers. Reggie, of course, a Hall of Famer. And if I'm not mistaken, we've lost both of them, which is really, really sad. We lost Reg from us. If I'm not mistaken, I think we lost Bill Freilich too.
Yeah, I heard about Freilich too. Yeah, it's definitely like a shame that and yeah, if you knew them like personally, sorry for the loss and everything.
Yeah, it was tough to lose Reggie. Reggie was a junior my freshman year at Tennessee when I redshirted, and then my senior year when I got to play, we were starting. I was a redshirt freshman. We started another redshirt freshman and 2 sophomores in the secondary. And because of Reggie and his pass rush, I think we finished 7th in the country in pass defense. We all like to claim that we did it, but we all knew the truth was no one could throw the ball because Reggie was wrapped around them.
Yeah. Hey, Justin, do you have anything to add on? I know I've been asking a lot of questions.
No, you're good, bro. I was going to take it back maybe like a little bit before that, though. But you mentioned being a huge Tennessee fan growing up. As far as like after high school, was Tennessee always the college for you? And also, too, when you made that decision, what was that process like?
Justin, you're taking me back, man. I'm reminiscing now. Come along with me, all right? We're going to have a little quick ride, okay? Tennessee was the school. As I told you, I watched Condredge Holloway play against UCLA 1974 season opener. It ended up in a 17-17 tie. Condredge hurt a shoulder. They took him to the hospital. He comes back. Found out later they probably shot him a little bit, give him a little something extra to go. He comes back, takes them down. They score a touchdown. They go for 2 to tie the game because back then we didn't have overtime. And he dives in on his bad shoulder, gets the 2-point conversion, 17-17 tie. I turned to my dad September of 1974 and said, I'm going to Tennessee. I want to play quarterback like Condredge Holloway. And never had seen the school, sight unseen. Progressed through high school, We didn't know. My high school had never had a Division I football player. So my high school coach didn't know. I didn't know. Was I good enough? What was happening? And lo and behold, found out people were starting to recruit me. So it all worked out. What it came down to was being a kid in New Paltz, New York. Back then, you could take 6 official visits for college. And I said, I'm going to take every last one of them because I want to see some places. So I visited Rutgers, Syracuse, Penn State, which makes sense about where I grew up regionally, right? I visited Michigan, UCLA, and Tennessee was my last visit. And that was on purpose because that was where my heart was. And I wanted to see all the other schools and see if anything could top it. And then see if Tennessee would meet it, what I thought it was when I went on my last visit. And it all came to pass. If I didn't go to Tennessee, I think my decision was coming down to Michigan or UCLA. Bo Schembechler was head coach of Michigan. Terry Donahue, God, I miss them both. He was head coach of UCLA. I had great options, had great opportunities I never thought I'd ever have. But Tennessee was where my heart was from the beginning. And my recruiting trip matched up to it. And that was all she wrote.
Yeah, and I have a question about your college career. Who is the best player you played with or against, or both?
Okay, let's start with. I played with Reggie White.
Mm-hmm. Steeler, too.
When I got to Tennessee, not only was Reggie there, the NCAA champion 4x100 relay team was 4 wide receivers from Tennessee, led by one Willie Gall. Okay, mm-hmm. I played with Tim McGee, later a starter with the Cincinnati Bengals on a Super Bowl team. Terrific wide receiver. Okay. I played with Reggie and Raleigh McKenzie, both of them NFL players. Raleigh is an offensive guard. Reggie is a linebacker. Reggie became a general manager in the NFL with the Oakland Raiders. So I played with a lot of really good players. I could go on all day. Carl Zander, linebacker, Cincinnati Bengals. David Douglas, tackle Bengals. I go on. I played with a lot of really great players. Tommy Sims, our captain in the secondary, was a 7th-round pick of the Colts and started day 1, opening day, on some really bad turf in New England, tore up his knee, and unfortunately never got back to those heights again. But he was starting as a 7th-round pick. He was getting ready to have a heck of an NFL career. So I could go on, as I mentioned. Who did I play against? Well, will you take Bo Jackson? Would that count?
Pretty good choice.
Oh, you know it.
Played against Bo Jackson, Boomer Esiason at Maryland, Frank Reich at Maryland. Again, you're playing in the SEC. You're playing nothing but terrific players everywhere you turn. I played on defense. I didn't play quote-unquote against them, but played against Alabama when Derek Thomas was one outside linebacker and Cornelius Bennett was the other.
Yeah, no, that is quite the talent. And that kind of leads me into my next one. So you mentioned playing Alabama, and obviously, Alabama gets loud, Rocky Top gets loud, but what's been like the craziest atmosphere you ever played in?
LSU, Auburn. LSU, they I don't know if they still do it. I hope they don't. But they would have Mike the Tiger, their mascot, their live mascot. They'd put him in the room next to your locker room. So while you're pulling on your uniform, they would prod him a little bit, jump on his cage, and you hear Mike roar. Let me tell you, that tests whether you want to be there or not, okay? Trust me on that one. And then when it was time to run out for the game, they would put him about 15 feet outside your door. So when you came out and then had to make the turn to the field, you were staring straight at Mike the Tiger. And that atmosphere, as you imagine, when it's nighttime in LSU, it gets cranked up pretty well. Auburn was my first ever SEC game. I was a freshman, true freshman, fly to Auburn. Tennessee had beaten them the year before in a controversial, should the clock have stopped, did it not? Auburn was driving. They always thought they'd gotten, kind of job down the stretch. And they couldn't wait for us to get to town. And about the third play of the game, our tight end, Kenny Jones, we called a throwback screen to our tight end. And they had safeties, Mark Dorminey and Jim Bob Harris. Jim Bob played in the NFL as a linebacker, but they were known as the Bruise Brothers. And the rules have changed about how you can use your headgear to tackle and all that. Back then, it was kind of fair game. And I can't remember which one read it. I feel like it was Mark Dorminey. And he got underneath the screen. And as soon as Kenny caught the ball, Mark Dorminey's headgear cracked him right under the chin. And you could hear it all over the stadium. And Kenny goes, first thing it hits the back of his head. He's laying there, balls on his chest, arms splayed out. And I thought, what have I got myself into? And that place came unglued. Like you know the old thing, you can't hear yourself think.
Mm-hmm.
My college roommate, Tyrone Robinson, was on the trip with me. And I was standing right next to him. And I remember we tried to talk to each other when that hit occurred, and we couldn't hear each other. We were this close. We were right there, shoulder to shoulder, could not hear each other. And it was like that the entire day. The most physical beating I've ever witnessed taken as a team. I didn't play that day. I was redshirting, and believe me, I was thrilled. Okay. Our guys were out there fighting hard, but Auburn was laying the wood to us left and right. And I remember the flight home was just nothing but pain. I thought, I don't know that I'm cut out for SEC football. These people, they will take you out. You grow, you mature, you learn. Fortunately, I was cut out for him, was able to start 4 years, start my next year. But I remember that like it was yesterday. I remember going to the Swamp at Florida. And you talk about loaded, Kerwin Bell at quarterback. I played against 3 first-round running backs. Lorenzo Hampton, John L. Williams, Neil Anderson, all in the same backfield at Florida at that time. Lomas Brown, the great offensive tackle, Jeff Zimmerman, the great guard. And then they had Louis Oliver on defense, among others. They were really good. And we go down there to play. It's 1985. It's about 375 degrees. And they still had that bad artificial turf, those old rugs, just like we had, and it was awful. It was so hot. Oh, my goodness, it was hot. We cut warm-up short. And the year before, Florida had won the SEC, but they had their title stripped for recruiting violations, which were about 117 or so. And allegedly, and I think it's true, Tennessee turned them in first. So you can imagine how excited they were when we got to town, because now we had cost them a title. And they couldn't wait. And they had this, they were selling these T-shirts with this gator that looked like it was on steroids. And it was strangling our dog, Smokey the dog, our mascot. And it said, the Gators need a contender. Any volunteers? And the night before the game, I'm watching TV, the local broadcast. And they said, let's go to our local reporter at the local Piggly Wiggly, which is a true franchise. How things going down there, Bobby? And he goes, oh, I tell you one thing. There's no oranges here. They're sold out. Here's our service, sir. Sold out. No oranges. And I said, oh, boy, we are in trouble. And when we came out of the tunnel, the barrage of oranges that hit us was off the charts. We had a manager, and, the manager's got the shorts on, they're running. He got hit in the thigh and dropped, and his thigh was black and blue for a month. I mean, it was crazy. The atmosphere was off the charts, unhinged. They beat us 17-10. Terrific ball game. Terrific game. And they were really good. We were pretty darn good, too. We ended up winning the SEC that year. Florida wasn't eligible. And then I believe they got beat by Georgia later in the year. So we would have tied for the title. They would have won the tiebreaker because head-to-head. But because they weren't eligible, we won the SEC, went to the Sugar Bowl, and beat Miami. I was atmosphere. Check that game out. The Sugar Bowl, our Tennessee people took over New Orleans, all right? We took over the Dome.
That's funny you mentioned that. I was actually going to ask you about that 1985 team. So you guys won the SEC championship. You guys finished top 10 for the first time, I think 16 years, something like that. I was going to ask you, what was that season like? And just playing through that season and just having one of the best years Tennessee had at that point in quite some time.
Justin, it was the type of year that you look back on, and when people talk about magical, when people talk about things fell into place, people talk about taking advantage of opportunity, that was us. We led the nation in turnover ratio. I think we were plus 27 or something like that. I mean, we just took it. I mean, whatever the number is, it was a super number, all right? We had to have people step up in spots we didn't expect. Our quarterback, Tony Robinson, was truly a Heisman contender. Got his knee torn up against Alabama. All right. Daryl Dickey, who came in and was one of the early sixth-year seniors. came in, and he was the son of our athletic director, Doug, who had been the head coach of Tennessee and Florida and is in the College Football Hall of Fame. He had to carry us home, and we had some shaky moments. We ended up tying Georgia Tech 6-6. Had to kick a field goal at the buzzer to get a tie at home. We tied UCLA in the opener. I mean, 2 ties, but in between, the magic started to work. We had a bunch of, no-name guys on defense that made play after play after play. My defensive back colleague, Chris White, who had never started for us before, started as a 5th-year senior, got an opportunity. I had a bad ankle for the UCLA game, and so he started the ball game, ended up with 3 interceptions. I thought I'd never play again. I thought I lost my job. Ended up playing next to him for most of the season. And he had an All-American year with 9 interceptions, another one in the Sugar Bowl. One of the best things I've ever seen, one of the great one-year performances. He was an All-American. Dale Jones, our outside linebacker, later at Appalachian State, was an All-American, the outside backer. Wasn't even recruited out of high school. Had to go to Georgia Military Institute in order to attract attention and get a scholarship from Tennessee, and worked himself into a terrific player. Those were the kind of people we had. Did we have some stars later? Sure. Tim McGee was on the team and right down the line. But I think like our 5th string tailback, Jeff Powell, who had been a walk-on track and field athlete from William and Mary, broke the biggest run of the game. It was that type of a year, Justin. It was that type of a season for us. People stepped up in spots you didn't expect. We made plays people didn't expect. We blitzed Miami into oblivion that day. They scored first. They faked the punt on their first series after we had what we thought was a 3-and-out. Kept the ball, threw a touchdown pass to Michael Irvin, 7-0, and everybody thought the route was on. They were like a double-digit favorite. And we came back, tied it. We were up 17-7 at the half and just steadily pulled away, beat them 35-7. And if they had won that game, they would have rightly claimed a national championship, because Oklahoma won it all that year. They beat Oklahoma in Norman head-to-head convincingly. Actually broke Troy Aikman's ankle. He ends up transferring to UCLA. Oklahoma goes back to the wishbone, and OU was back to being OU. But without us, OU doesn't win that national title.
Yeah, speaking of the wishbone too, I do want to ask, it's kind of gone away in recent years. Like Georgia Tech, they lost their old coach. Now they don't use it anymore. Just tell me a little bit about when you played. How were there more formations then, would you say, whenever you were playing? I feel like college is much more diverse compared to the NFL when it comes to that.
Yeah, college football was much more of a running game when I played in the 80s. We used to talk about how it was played between the hashes, right? And the college field is wider hashes than the NFL, but most of the game was played between there. People like to run it. Fullbacks were predominant. A lot of option football. Auburn was still running the wishbone and triple option. Had a lot of teams that ran option football out of I formation. You had to deal with a lot of stuff as a free safety. Always had to be what we called an alley player, all right, side to side in the alley, because a lot of plays took place there because of what you're talking about. Nowadays, what you're saying, Antonio, is Army, Navy, Air Force, small, schools with smaller players, that was their equalizer. Well, I'm hearing they're changing some of the blocking rules, which is going to negate some of that opportunity for them, because a lot of those cut blocks at the line of scrimmage may not be taking place now. And that kind of negates what Army and Navy and Air Force does. So we'll see. But back then, you're exactly right. We saw a lot of that. But then also starting to throw the football a little bit more. Tennessee did it more. But let's be honest about it. In the SEC, after I was gone, Steve Spurrier in Florida, the fun and gun, that started to change offenses in a big way. Everyone wasn't wearing a neck roll anymore. And now wide receivers actually caught the football and weren't just blocking on toss sweeps and cracks.
Yeah, and that leads me to Tennessee this year to last year. I mean, think about how much they passed with Hendon Hooker, with Hyatt, with Tillman. This year, I do want to ask though about this year, what you see out of this Tennessee team, and just how the team's been doing under Coach Heupel so far.
Coach Heupel has done a phenomenal job since he got into Tennessee, because remember, he came in with probation looming, right? Loss of scholarships out there. Would they even be able to play in a bowl game? All of that, there's a lot of uncertainty. And he and his staff did something that I thought that was remarkable that a lot of people don't really lock in on. That team had really had no confidence, all right? They've been kind of beaten down. the way the previous staff coached them. There's a lot more yelling and you guys aren't this and that. And he put his finger on the pulse of that team and knew they needed loving. They needed some care. And he and his staff, they came in much more of a calm nature. Let's get these kids to find a way to trust us. Because you know how it is. You got to trust the coach before you can put it on the line for him. They had to buy into this staff. And a number of those players have been through multiple staffs. So it's hard to get their buy-in right out of the gate. But they did. And they did it well and played better than we expected. And then last year was a terrific season. I mean, Hendon Hooker took over the year before, I think, second half of the Pitt game, which was week 2, and never really looked back and was having a Heisman Trophy type season when he hurt his knee at South Carolina. We're back in the mix. Recruiting's good. The fan base that had been so patient for so long is being rewarded, and they deserve it. Now we'll see how Coach Heupel and crew keep it going, but I fully expect them to do so. They'll fill in the guys that were lost. Joe Milton gets another chance to be the quarterback. The offense is high-powered, and they will continue to attract people there, I do believe. But, we're all chasing Georgia in the SEC. Normally you're saying you're chasing Alabama. We're chasing Georgia right now. Even Alabama's chasing Georgia. And a lot of people tell me LSU might be better than Alabama this year in the West. We'll see how that turns out. But Nick Saban's never gone 3 years without winning the SEC. He hasn't won it the last 2 years. This is going to be an interesting season.
Yeah, SEC, big hitters like LSU, all looking good again, having a ton of people back. And it's just it's always like Georgia. It's always next man up. And just the amount of players drafted. Like the Steelers got their first 2-round picks other than Joey Porter. You had Broderick Jones and Darnell Washington. It's just crazy how these SEC schools are just, milking out the talent.
And it's just a normal deal for them. I mean, Justin, you know this as well. Every year you look and see the number of pros drafted, the SEC leads the conferences. I mean, it's been a long time since someone else has beaten them out. It's style of play. It's what football means in the South and means to those schools. The slogan of the SEC, right? SEC, it just means more. Drove people crazy when they first came out with that slogan. I've worked at Stanford out in the Pac-12, and I've got friends in the Big Ten and friends in the ACC. And when that slogan first came out, oh my God, people lost their mind. It just means more. Oh, blah, 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 blah. I'm not to break it to them, but it does. Like the people care. All right. When I was in school, we used to have the saying, "Hey, there's 2 sports here. There's football and there's spring football." Right? That's all. We used to laugh about that, right? Didn't mean the other sports didn't matter, because once the SEC decided every other sport mattered, you see that they're very good in all those other sports too. But when I was in school in the 80s, football and spring football, then you add in recruiting. Recruiting became its own sport, right? Now it's football, spring football, recruiting, transfer portal. And in the SEC, people wake up in the morning, go to their local coffee shop, go to local watering hole. They're talking SEC football 24/7, 365. It does mean something to them. Someone told me once they did a report on an SEC town and productivity, and it was based on whether the team won or lost that weekend. So the workforce productivity, much higher when the team won. When the team lost, struggle all week long until about Thursday, because about Thursday you start to renew hope for the weekend and people come back up again. But that's what it's like. Does that mean it doesn't mean something to Big Ten or the ACC? Maybe we should lament the Pac-12 a little bit. But all that being said, it does mean a great deal to the people in the SEC. And that shows up when we get to the college football playoff now. Before that, the BCS, and before that, the mythical national championship with voting. SEC teams are almost always in the mix.
That's actually, you made a point there with the Pac-12. I was going to ask you that. So I was going to get your thoughts on USC, UCLA, going to the Big Ten, the Pac-12 seemingly, it's like, I don't want to say collapsing, but there's
no, it's collapsed, Justin. Let's just what it is.
Yeah.
There is no Pac-12 if there's 4 teams left. I mean,
right.
We could try and sugarcoat it, but there is none. Right now, those 4, Cal, Stanford, Washington State, Oregon State, are trying to figure out what to do. Where do they go? Do they have a place? they can't be the ones, and I will tell you, I don't think they can be the ones who can sit there and say, okay, let's go get other teams and make them into the Pac-12. The Mountain West Conference has a better TV deal than the Pac-12 does. Why would they go there? They're like, no, you want to come play with us. That's a decision that will have to be made. This ACC talk for Cal and Stanford, we have to wait and see if it fits. In the old days, because of academics, it would fit perfectly. But academics, whether they want to say it or not the same consideration for why these teams are moving. Okay? I am a traditionalist in almost every way, in so many different ways. I love the geographics of the Pac-12, the Big Ten, the ACC, the Big 12, the SEC. I loved all of that. It fit well. The Pac-12 was the best travel conference league ever because you almost had two of everything. Washington State, Oregon State, Stanford, Cal next to each other, Arizona State. You just go right on down the line. It was perfect. So when those teams traveled, they had a great tandem to go do it all especially for the basketballs, the baseballs, the volleyballs, all those. That doesn't exist anymore. Okay, Arizona State and Arizona, I believe, are in the Big 12, right? Did they go to the Big 12?
They're moving there, yeah.
Right. I remember when Arizona State were in the WAC.
Mm-hmm.
And their big move was to the Pac-8, and it became the Pac-10. The Rose Bowl. What's going to happen to the Rose Bowl? That was Big 10, Pac-12, right?
Right.
And it's always the team from the cold weather coming out to beautiful Pasadena and playing. USC, UCLA are in the Big 10. Oregon and Washington are now in the Big 10. If the Rose Bowl still exists with that same format, which I'm not sure how they can because there's no Pac-12, but imagine, I said this when it all happened, before it all collapsed. I couldn't wait for the day now, even though I don't like it, to announce, and ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the UCLA Bruins, the champions of the Big Ten. What? Playing on their home field as the Big Ten representative in the Rose Bowl. That's what would have happened. This is weird for me. I don't like it, but guess what? No one asked me, and it's not going back. And I don't think we're done. Like, we are at the Big 12, we're at the ACC, we're the Big 10, and the SEC. I would not be surprised to see it contract even more. I'm not saying tomorrow, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. And eventually, all these teams are going to break away from the NCAA totally and run their own ship. So you two can be co-commissioners of the new college football, because that's how it's going to be run. It'll be run much more like an NFL type of a thing. And then they'll figure out how they want to break it out, divisions, all the other stuff that goes along with it. But the days of, oh, well, the Pac-12, it'll be impacted. No. The Big Ten, they're at 18 teams now. 18. Okay? And by the way, I think we're all fired up to see, that Rutgers-Washington battle next year. Or I mean, come on. This is where
it's almost like how, a Big Ten team would be a 7 versus 10, and in the NCAA tournament, these teams don't usually play each other.
No, they don't usually. It's a whole different deal, Antonio. And think of it this way too. I'm eager to see how TV gets proportioned, because not a portion, because here's the deal. You've got a lot of teams now that are going to be playing in the Western time zone and Pacific time zone. If you want to put them on Big Ten Network, which is normally an 11 a.m. Central Time, noon kickoff, are you going to play 9 a.m. games out there now? Because they can't always, you see where I'm going? They've got a few other things they're going to have to answer for, and that's a Big Ten game, not a Pac-12 game.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be interesting how all that goes. Obviously, what gets lost in it is all the other sports in their travel.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Volleyball team, the tennis team, the golf team. Those are going to be some serious road trips and even more missed class time.
Mm-hmm. And
the money dominates. You guys know that.
Another thing, too, is just think about trying to, imagine for you when you played at Tennessee, having to fly out to California for a game, or having to fly out to Stanford for a game, every week. That would just that's what UCLA is going to be dealing with. They're going to be having to fly to Big Ten, five and a half, 6 hours. And
now, fortunately for football, Antonio, it's a charter flight. It's not nearly as bad as if you're going
like commercial.
But your point's well taken, because the NFL teams, a lot of them, if they have to go east to west, they just stay out there. I don't know that that's an option in college football, that you can stay out for a 2-3 week road trip. All right, that's going to be difficult to do for those teams going east to west, let alone west to east. West to east in a lot of ways is easier, but it's still difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's for me, like you said, you weren't a huge fan of it. I like the traditional conferences, even 15 to 20 years ago, they were at least geographically, even though there were some changes, at least geographically, they were okay. I will say this though, I like Pitt being as a Pitt fan, my dad grew up one, like the ACC, but I still to this day miss the Big East games against Cincinnati and West Virginia. I know they still play Syracuse, but I don't know, just the old school conferences, I just that's one thing I'm going to miss, but I guess we'll have to see how it goes. It's going to be one thing is going to be better for sure is Pitt's definitely going to be playing more Pac-12 teams. So for me, it's going to be cool to see these new teams and stuff that are now coming to my side of the world, I guess you can say. But, I guess it's to be seen. Yeah.
So true. We are going to see a whole lot of new, and sometimes new is really good. As I said, as a traditionalist, I'm going to miss some of the old. Okay, with Oklahoma going to the SEC and Oklahoma State staying in the Big 12, their traditional rivalry game known as Bedlam, gone. Mm-hmm. Not going to do it anymore. Pitt in the ACC, right? West Virginia, right? Big 12. How often do they get in the backyard brawl? Last year was the first time in how many years?
Since 2010.
All those types of things. Pitt and Penn State.
Right.
Rarely ever play anymore in terms of football. Those are things that get lost and missed. And now, as we say in the SEC, now you got to get your hate on for someone else. Someone you don't even know, but you got to find a way to hate them. In the old days, you didn't have to find a way. You had reason. You knew it was built up over time. Why Tennessee and Kentucky couldn't get along, right? Why Alabama and Auburn can't stand each other. All that was easy. Now in these conferences, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but knowing these players and teams and people will find a way. No question.
Mm-hmm. I do want to ask you, though, about another issue, though. So besides the conference realignments, so the college football playoff, and I don't really have a problem with how it's set up now, but obviously I think they're looking at maybe 12 teams. I think that was the number.
Well, we're going to 12 after this season.
Okay.
But that's now become a little problematic because of the conference shifting.
Right.
We'll see how they decide to do it. But yes, they're supposed to go to 12 after this year. This last year, 4.
Okay. So I'm just curious, you mentioned you played in an era where your Sugar Bowl, that was your championship, and if people voted for that. Then we had the BCS championship where it was the top 2 teams played in the championship, and now it's shifted to a more NFL playoff style format. What's your opinion in general, thoughts about the college football playoff as it is now and where it can evolve in the future?
Great question. I like the idea of a college football playoff. What I don't like is the extra number of games that these kids are subjected to, because we've seen now in recent years, if the bowl game doesn't mean championship type ball, the better players opt out because they have to protect themselves for their NFL future. If you're now asking kids to play 3 or 4 more games, are we going to start seeing kids opt out for championship ball? We can't say that they won't. That worries me a little bit. Do we have to cut down the regular season so these kids aren't playing 16 games? I realize 1AA, Division II, Division III have done that for a while. I don't know that that's healthy, especially considering how much we're talking about safety in football right now. So that scares me a little bit. I want to see how that plays out. But I do like the fact that they're actually playing for championships and we don't have to argue it out. To me, that's great nostalgia. When the argument was, hey, the number 1 team played in this bowl, the number 2 team played in that bowl, number 3 team played in that bowl, all of them won. Who's the best? And then you fight it out over a cup of coffee. I don't know that was the greatest thing in the world. It leads to a lot of lore about, well, who was better? Well, I say they were better. I say they were better. But now that you can play it on the field, you don't have to answer that question anymore. But I do worry about the increasing number of games that college football kids have to play. Because I'll be honest, think about it this way. Whatever number of NFL players are playing on those fields, there's a much greater number of guys like me who didn't make it in the NFL. Like a coach told me one time, I said, how come you always punt the ball out of bounds when you're punting? He's in the SEC, and he didn't have a great team. He said, because that punt returner back there probably has NFL next to his name, and the guys I have chasing down the punt returner all have CPA or MBA next to their name. That doesn't work. Okay? So that's what you have, and that's what's going on. Yes, NFL players will be on those fields. The vast majority won't be. So maybe that's the case for, hey, this is their opportunity to play their last bit of ball. The NFL guys have to make a decision. I just hate the idea that they're going to opt out when we're playing championship ball.
Yeah, and it's like also too, like the human element to these things too is like football is one of the sports where you need that full week too, and it's just like it's almost like when's the season gonna end as well too? Like these kids still have school and stuff. Like by the time the season ends, it's usually that first week of January is that game, the second Monday in January.
They're gonna keep it for that target date, but you'll start your playoffs early. Like you remember, you used to get that month off end of the season, but the playoffs will start the week after the conference championships now, so they can still fit it into that time frame. So that's where we're going to go, and that's just kind of how it is. And fellas, I hate to do this, but I have to go. So if you got anything to wrap up for me, I would appreciate it. I'm sorry to do that, but I'm backstopped on the other side.
Okay. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, no, I no, that's cool. Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah,
I do have one more request though.
Yeah,
you want one small favor. So we had your broadcast partner Ian Eagle on our podcast.
Ian.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we did. And so I'm starting a new thing where we have guests on. They do like a little intro to our show. So all I want you to say is, you say your name is Charles Davis and you're listening to the Rossetti and Stewart Podcast.
All right, you ready? Hey, everyone, I'm Charles Davis. You're listening to the Rossetti and Stewart Podcast, one of the best in the business.
Perfect.
I like what you added there. I love what you added there. That was amazing.
All right,
hey,
but
by the way, I'm not lying. Thanks a lot, guys. That was a lot of fun. I'm sorry I have to cut it off.
No,
that was a blast. I hope it worked out well.
That was awesome. That was awesome. Thank you again for coming on. And hey, one of these days, we're always looking for guests. If you want to come back on, by all means.
You guys let me know. I'll hang with you too.
Oh, absolutely. Heck yeah. We appreciate it.
You let me know and we'll figure something out. Be a nice little hang again, okay? I appreciate you both. Continued success to you both as well. And you tell everybody, hey, for me in Pittsburgh, all right?
We'll do.
I have to come back and check out you Yinzers.
All right.
I'll make sure I'll tell my dad about the 13-3 game. It's crazy. I actually saw on YouTube like a recording of that game. We actually rewatched that game like a couple months ago.
We had it going, couldn't score. Pitt hung in there, and then the starting quarterback broke his collarbone, and that brought in what is his name? He ended up being a great quarterback for you.
Matt Kavanaugh?
No. That was way after Matt. Anyway, we'll look it up.
It was after Matt was 76.
Matt was on the national title team.
Yeah. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. He played in the NFL.
I can see him play today. Played in the NFL. He was a really good player, and somehow he was number 2 that night. We should have left him out on the sideline because he came in and beat us.
I know who it is.
Let me know when you figure it out, okay?
Yes, well done.
All right, guys. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hey, have a good one. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
See ya.